500-word document, beginning with the title only. Allegorical Interpretations of Gnostic Myths, Lessons from Greek Mythology and the Pseudo-Clement Literature. The question of how to interpret Gnostic myths, such as those found in Valentinian and Sethian writings, is best approached by considering how Greek myths themselves were read in antiquity. The Pseudo-Clementine Homilies preserve an important witness to this process. In Homily 6, Clement records a dialogue with Appion, who makes clear that the myths of the Greeks were never intended to be taken literally. Instead, they were allegories of natural, moral, and political truths. By extension, we may say the same of the myths found in Gnostic texts. The figures of Sophia, Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, and the archons should not be taken as literal cosmic beings, but understood allegorically, as referring to political powers, psychological states, and the structures of domination which Gnostic Christians sought to critique. The Pseudo-Clementine method of allegory. The Pseudo-Clementine homilies show that the ancients did not interpret myth as factual history. In Homily 6, Chapter 1, Appion reminds Clement that his earlier criticisms of the gods for their immoral behavior were misguided, since the stories concealed deeper truths. Open quote. But my son, you ought to have known that I was not in earnest when I wrote such things about the gods, but was concealing the truth from my love to you. That truth, however, if it so please you, you may hear from me now. Close quote. In Chapter 2, Appion explains, open quote, the wisest of the ancients, men who had by hard labor learned all truth, kept the path of knowledge hid from those who were unworthy, and had no taste for lessons in divine things. For it is not really true that from Ouranos and his mother Ge were born 12 children, as the myth counts them. But, my son, as I said, such stories have a peculiar and philosophical meaning, which can be allegorically set forth in such a way that you yourself would listen with wonder. Close quote. Thus, according to this tradition, Greek myths contained a peculiar and philosophical meaning, hidden beneath their literal surface. They were never intended as accounts of historical events, but as allegories for cosmic order, natural cycles, and political realities. In Chapter 3, this method is applied. Open quote, there was once a time when nothing existed but chaos and a confused mixture of orderless elements. Hesiod in the Theogony says, assuredly chaos was the very first to come into being. Look on Apollo as the wandering sun, Peripolon, a son of Zeus, who was also called Mithras, as completing the period of a year. And these said transformations of the all-pervading Zeus must be regarded as the numerous changes of the seasons, while his numberless wives you must understand to be years or generations. Close quote. Here mythic figures are reinterpreted as natural and political symbols. This allegorical reading provides the interpretive model for Gnostic myths. Allegory and the Gnostic myths. Gnostic writings, like Greek myths, present elaborate stories involving divine beings, cosmic falls, and hostile rulers. On the surface, these myths appear to recount a mythological history of the universe. But if we apply the hermeneutical key provided by the Pseudo-Clementine literature, their deeper meaning is revealed. Figures like Sophia, Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, and the archons should be read allegorically, not literally. Their significance lies in political and psychological commentary. Sophia represents the yearning for wisdom and the tragic consequences of separation from the divine fullness. Her fall is the human experience of alienation, of seeking truth, but becoming trapped in ignorance and corruption. Psychologically, she embodies the divided human condition. Yaldabaoth and the Demiurge symbolize illegitimate rulers who arrogantly claim divine authority. Allegorically, these figures point to the Roman emperor who proclaimed himself Lord of the world, and to the Bishop of Rome who claimed universal authority over Christians. Both are depicted as ignorant of the higher God, blind to truth, and yet wielding oppressive power. The archons represent subordinate rulers and enforcers of this illegitimate order. They correspond to presbyters and deacons in the Roman Church hierarchy who maintained obedience to the bishop and ensured conformity through coercion and persecution. Politically, they stand for the entire structure of domination, ecclesiastical and imperial. Psychologically, they signify the internal forces of fear, desire, and ignorance that keep humans enslaved. Thus, when a Gnostic text describes Yaldabaoth creating the world in arrogance and setting archons over it, this should be read not as a literal cosmology, but as an allegory for Rome's empire and the authoritarian church. Persecution and the necessity of allegory. Why did Gnostics adopt this mythic form rather than writing plainly? The answer is persecution. To openly denounce